Right, good morning. I think we're all up and running. Welcome. My name is Richard Burgess-Kelly. I'm the Director of Resource and Growth for Soprasteria. Thank you for joining us on our webinar, Are Humans Still Better Than Algorithms? What's the fight for the future of hiring? Today, we're excited to delve into a fascinating and highly relevant topic, which you will see being debated all over LinkedIn at the moment. Especially as we decide what is the context of modern recruitment practices. Soprasteria are specialists in recruitment and resourcing services, and we've seen firsthand the transformative impact of AI in the hiring process in the public and private sector. However, the question still remains, can algorithms truly replace human judgment, or do humans still have the upper hand in making hiring decisions? Joining me today are two of my esteemed colleagues, Lucy and Felicity, who are both occupational psychologists. Together, we will explore the psychological dimensions of AI-made hiring decisions and the potential risks and benefits of AI assessing soft skills. Throughout this webinar, we aim to provide a balanced view of the strengths and limitations of both human and algorithmic approaches to hiring. We hope you find it an engaging and thought-provoking conversation, and we'll try and answer as many questions as you have. Just in case you were unaware, Soprasteria, the brand that I work for, Lucy and Felicity work for, we are a prominent European leader in consulting, digital services and software development. We offer a wide range of services, including consulting, technology, transformation. We've got SSCL, so Shared Services Connect Limited. They are a leader of providing business critical services, so BPO services to organisations like the MOJ, HMPPS, DWP, Home Office, Metropolitan Police. Lots of back office, HR, payroll, recruitment, resourcing. We've got NHS SBS, similar organisation, which is a joint venture with the Department of Health and Social Care, where we provide a wide range of back office services into NHS trusts. We've got Graphica, which is a simulation provider. New is part of the group, but they deliver simulation products and software consultancy services into the transport industry. We've got Soprasteria Financial Services, delivering financial services into UK and European partners. We've got CX Partners, which is a research and design consultancy that works very closely with the wider group. And then we've got Soprasteria Next, which is a leading business transformation consultancy that really deals with the business challenges. From my perspective, talking about the recruitment and resourcing service, in short, since I've joined in 2020 as a permanent employee, we've delivered probably on average around about 50,000+ placements into UK government and the police market year on year. Now, these roles attract nearly 1 million applications, which is quite significant because they're for quite high volume job opportunities. And we deliver through various differentiated innovative solutions for clients. We digitally assess and test those candidates and make them a little bit more of a manageable number for those clients. But we also support initiatives like reducing time to hire, enhancing candidate experience, and delivering a more diverse and inclusive workforce. Now, obviously, there's lots to talk about today, and I want to get straight into the panel. I would very much like to introduce Felicity first. Felicity, if you'd like to come off mute and introduce yourself and talk about yourself, your role and your background.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Hi, Felicity Hill-Myers. I am Head of Recruitment and Learning Services and also Chief Occupational Psychologist in Soprasteria. So I suppose my hat on today is very much in my occupational psychology role. I've worked in sort of talent and recruitment for the last 16 years across the public sector, sort of starting my journey working for the RAF and being involved in the psychology department there and how we select officers and airmen into the services, and then moving over to what was then Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, looking at the selection of prison and trainee probation officers, and then wider kind of MOJ recruitment before moving over to what was SSCL previously and now into Soprasteria, and still very much looking at recruitment into various public sector roles.
Thank you. Lucy, would you like to come off mute and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Stephen. I'm also an occupational psychologist and I work within our resourcing innovation team. So we look to design and develop new kind of resourcing solutions for current clients, but also future clients. And I provide the kind of OpSych input into that in terms of assessments, the kind of whole process, candidate experience, automation, analytics, AI, etc. I've got 24 years-ish experience working in assessment and selection. Also started in the Air Force, and Felicity and I worked together for, I think, about 10 years back in the day before our paths kind of diverged and then have come back together again with SSCL and SOPRA. So my experience has been very much designing, evaluating, validating selection processes across the public sector, predominantly in defence, before joining SOPRA.
Very much, and I'm very grateful to have both of you on today, and I've worked closely with both of you on a number of new and existing contracts, and it's quite nice, and I think it's one of the big differentiators of SOPRA Stereo having an internal occupational psychologist team, and leveraging your wealth of knowledge in designing and selecting assessments and building assessments and selecting assessment partners for our current client base. So no, thank you both for joining and letting me question you and letting the audience question you a little bit later today. But in all honesty, we could spend a whole day talking about this discussion. As I said earlier, it's one of LinkedIn's biggest debates at the moment. Many people are going through processes of recruiting. They are applying for job opportunities and then getting responses within 15 minutes of being screened out. So I think what we've tried to do today is make a bit of a directional path by asking some key questions. And then what I would say to our audience members is keep an eye out for our poll questions a little later on. They won't be up just yet, but they will be up a little bit later, where we will ask the audience around what sort of questions you would like answering or you would like our thoughts on. So, but please feel free to answer questions in the chat. I'm actually going to drop the presentation just so you've got a full view of Felicity, Lucy, and myself. But I think we're just going to jump straight into the psychology behind AI made hiring decisions. So I think my first question is going to be to Lucy. How does trust in AI compare to trust in human decision makers during hiring?
Yeah, thank you. I think, like you just said, we could spend all day talking about this whole topic, but I think we could actually spend a whole day talking about trust and all the different kind of layers to trust in AI and hiring. And I think, if you look at it from a candidate perspective, a recruiter perspective, assessment providers, hiring managers, everyone's going to have a different level of trust because they're going to have different views, experiences. They're going to want different things from it, and therefore how much they trust it to be able to deliver that. So I was trying to think kind of maybe like upper level so that we didn't get bogged down in all of the kind of detail to start with. And I was thinking about an article I read a really long time ago about pilotless passenger planes and how the outcome of this article was that humans wanted humans in the loop to make that final decision, and especially to make a decision if something went wrong. And even when it was explained to them that the AI could do everything better because it had access to more data, it could process more data more quickly, it could learn that data better, it could, kind of decide on better outcomes because of that data, people still wanted a human to make that final decision. And I think that is exactly where we are with AI and hiring, that this sort of algorithm aversion, that even if we know or we're told or it's explained to us that the AI is going to be better at making those decisions, we still would opt to have a human making those decisions. And I think that probably spans all of those different kind of people, so your candidates, your recruiters, your hiring managers. I think there's still that level of we would prefer a human to be in that decision-making loop. If you add to that the view that humans, as soon as we see AI making a mistake, we don't trust it anymore, Whereas with humans, we're more likely to forgive it, explain it away, maybe see it as an isolated case, like that person made that bad hiring decision or was biased against a certain group of people, but that was just them. Whereas when it happens with AI, we kind of have a tendency to assume that it's going to happen every time it's used. And so that kind of mistrust grows. And I think if you go back to the pilotless plane, we all get on planes, or most of us get on planes, without really a second thought to the fact that human mistakes have caused issues in the past. But if you had been told that AI had made a decision and a plane had crashed because of it, would you get on that plane? And I wouldn't, even though that feels completely irrational, I wouldn't. And as soon as AI has a mistake or a problem, we hear about it. Social media, LinkedIn, news, forums, lawsuits, it becomes global news instantly. Everyone's aware of it. If a human makes a mistake, it either goes undetected because actually we don't pick up the bias, unconscious bias, etc. all the time, or it's only known about within like that small kind of sphere. And so that kind of gap between how we trust those two things just grows bigger. And then I was thinking about whether actually being more transparent makes people less trustful, because we're being transparent, so we see when things go wrong with AI, and therefore that's causing people to be less trusting of it. But actually, I think transparency still has to be the key to building that trust, because it means that candidates can understand what's happening to them, because it's often them that don't have that understanding because they don't know how it's working. But with that comes that kind of trade-off that the more open we are, the more of the bad stuff gets viewed, and therefore the longer that trust might take to build. But I think it will come eventually, and we're starting to see that with like trust in driverless cars, for example. It's taken a long time, but we are now starting to see people be a little bit more trusting that they're going to work in the way that they're expected to work.
I really like that. Thank you, Lucy. I mean, it's a really interesting point around the whole trustworthiness and how AI gets amplified. I mean, I probably hadn't fully appreciated until you just said around things go undetected when humans make bad hiring decisions. It's a really good point. If somebody comes in and then they leaves the business for X, Y, or Z reasons, you don't necessarily go back over the recruiting process and identify that it was a bad hiring decision, or there was bias brought in for X, Y, and Z reason, where if it was done by AI, it would definitely get amplified. Really interesting. I mean, Felicity, have you got any particular thoughts on the trust in AI compared to trust in human decision makers?
Yeah, I mean, well, I just totally agree with what Lucy said on the whole. And I think that the driverless cars analogy is really, something that we've seen over the last few years. That became a big thing. It was going to take over, and then suddenly it went very, very quiet because there was a fatality. And so I think for me, there's this thing about who do you blame? If you don't get a job and you can say, oh, well, that person, they didn't interview me fairly, they weren't listening to me, I wasn't given the time, I wasn't probed enough. That's one thing. What happens if it's just done through AI and it was completely computer based? Where do you kind of take that blame? And I think that's quite difficult for people. And if you appeal, what happens then? Because in an appeal of a live interview, you could ask the interviewer, what happened from your perspective. However, what do? Do we start providing, deep data results of how algorithms are being built for fairness? And I think probably that is something that is going to have to happen, through some processes, and there will be a lot more rigor and view required of actually the data that's underpinning. I think, Lucy mentioned algorithm aversion and that kind of instant distrust, but I think there's also this sort of automation bias on the other side, where there is this thing, whether it's us as just every day, using ChatGPT or Copilot now, or recruiters, because we know that it's very standardized, and it follows a process. I think there is this kind of automatic trust that it's correct. And I think that's where probably as occupational psychologists, we need to come in more and give our advice and guidance around, okay, yes, that that is sort of very process driven. However, where's the nuance behind that? Which is where that human side and the recruiters need to come back in. So I think there's a lot around that perception. Lucy mentioned the transparency. So, how clear are we being? But can the candidates also see that there are humans in there? Because that's what they like. They like that empathy, that additional explanation. And I think it gives people a bit of dignity as well in the recruitment process to have some human level of involvement. I think for us as kind of recruiting organizations, it's very difficult when we do really high volume recruitment. And so, particularly at SIFT processes, they're always going to be largely automated, and that's been a part of recruitment for decades. But actually, there's a difference between taking a test and knowing that, oh, if I've said A, that's wrong. If I say C, that's right, versus actually, speaking and having your words and the way that you kind of come across during that kind of interview analysed by AI. So I think there's a lack of trust there still. There was, I think, resume.org did a survey, and candidates were saying they're still 3 times more kind of likely to trust a process that has that human intervention. And one I really liked actually was that 68% of kind of tech staff wouldn't fully trust a fully AI sort of recruitment process. So you kind of think, well, if the people who really know how all of this works and how the AI models are designed aren't fully trustworthy of it, it's probably because it can't 100% replicate what humans do and what we add to the process.
Do either of you think that we'll ever get to a fully trusted AI solution? And I'm talking 5 years, 10 years down the line. Do you think there's ever going to be that confidence in AI, considering how fast it's growing at the moment?
I don't know if we want to, Richard. Maybe again, coming back to large scale volume recruitment where we've got 100,000 applicants for 2,000 roles. That's a really different thing to and kind of junior roles to maybe senior leadership roles where we're looking for really specific experience and capabilities. So maybe it depends on the roles and what we're looking for in the person. I think there'll be huge advances in what we trust AI to do and what skills, experience, technical abilities we feel comfortable using it for. But I do think there will always be those bits on the side where there's that nuance where we add value as humans. What do you think, Luce?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we'll ever get all the way there, but I think we will come on a lot in the next few years. And I do wonder whether part of the mistrust of AI is partly built on the fact that we understand that humans are fallible. So we've kind of accepted that there will be elements of bias in processes. We have accepted that when you're being interviewed by a person, that person, however well trained they are, there are potentially going to be unconscious biases. There's going to be other things that come into play. But it's the humans that are building that AI. It's the humans that are in the background, making sure that it works correctly, doing all that monitoring, trying to build the algorithms, the LLMs, etc. And I do wonder whether there's an element of that kind of circle that maybe we're not fully aware of yet, but actually part of that mistrust is because we know that it's come from people that are fallible, and therefore which do we want to put our trust in? Well, we understand humans a bit better, so at the moment we're happy to put our trust in that, even though we know it's not right, or it might not be right, versus a machine that's been built by those people and we don't fully understand it, so we're not sure what it's doing. We see it makes mistakes. Does that mean it's always going to make mistakes? Is that built into the whole system? And we see that repeated in different LinkedIn posts, news forums, etc. And yeah, I just kind of wonder, I was just thinking about that sort of link between the two and the building of the AI on the basis of the people, and the people having the flaws that we've come to accept.
I agree. I'm going to move on to our next question, right? What I will do is in a second, I will put up a poll for our third and fourth question to let some of the audience choose. But Felicity, I'm going to come to you first. So, based off obviously that trust and what we're thinking at the moment, one thing we've been discussing internally is can AI really assess soft skills, right? So, what are the risks of AI filling gaps or misinterpreting candidate traits?
Yeah.
Misinterpreting.
It's a really interesting one, I think, because I mean, I don't know about you guys. Well, I do know about you guys actually. I don't know about the audience and how much you personally use AI, but I use ChatGPT all the time. I would say daily, in my personal and in my work life. For just augmenting my role, just helping me to do my job or do my kind of personal admin. Um, and the way that you engage with it, you really do feel like it understands you, and it can communicate in a way that makes sense. But actually, AI doesn't really understand those soft skills. It infers them from what you say, how you say it. It's a large language model. It's been built on understanding data, basically. um, so I think there's that bit where it can already, and as we said, it will advance in so many ways about understanding things like, when you're speaking, what's your changes in tone, pauses, the vocabulary you use. But we've seen really big issues when it comes to interpreting things like expressions, and just generally how people speak when it comes to differences, whether that's across neurodiverse types or cultural differences. Sometimes a lack of confidence could be read as a lack of competence. So there's some really big issues, I think, there. And that's where it comes back to that trust thing, maybe, of, well, maybe AI is really good at this right now, but it's not good at this, and that's where in recruitment we still need those kind of human processes. I think the filling gaps thing is really interesting as well. For again, those who use AI a lot have probably seen various types of hallucinations. I once asked Copilot to design me an image for something, and it was about work and business, but it put a picture of the White House in the back. And I asked it, why have you put the White House in? And it responded saying that it hadn't. So, it had read what I'd asked it to and started filling in some gaps. I guess a more recruitment based one is, and this wasn't for recruitment, but I was using ChatGPT to produce a draft of a document for me. I'd given it the criteria, and I'd said, here's all the information you need to know about me, produce a brief, like a professional brief. And because of the criteria said it wanted something specific, it made up some things that it said I had done. So, oh, you've done this job or you've worked here before, because that's what the criteria said. But actually, all the information I'd fed it about me didn't say that. And I think that's the issue where probably we have to be aware of it from the candidate side, because we know, and I think it's quite right that candidates put in their experience and get support and help in essentially writing a behavioural response question. But it might not always just take their experience. It might extrapolate and start to add in some different ideas about what they may have done, especially when it's relating it to that criteria. And I guess on the scoring side, depending on whether a candidate's written 50 words or 500 words, for an example, maybe then if AI is being used to mark it, again, it might start to infer based on what the candidate has said. So I do think there's a lot of risk there still. And I think we're probably maybe a bit behind where I'd feel fully trusted with that. I think the other thing, I suppose, is this kind of amplification risk, I'd call it. If you and I think this sort of aligns with what you were saying a bit, Lucy, but if you make a human error judgment, that's an impact on one candidate. Okay, so I don't know, there's loads of research saying judges after lunch are more tired, or just before lunch, I think it is, and hungry, and so the decisions they make are quite different. So you make that judgment, and yes, it's terrible that it's the wrong one for a candidate, because that's their life that you're making a decision about, but that's one candidate. An AI misjudgment, that could be hundreds or thousands of candidates that it has an impact on. So I think the flaws that we can see might become more visible, and especially, Lucy, you were saying about where AI is being built on biased or flawed information. Again, then those decisions are really far-reaching. So yeah, I think the risks are really high. I think what we should start to be seeing, and I don't know if you've seen the news this week with the insane amount of investments that are being made by some of the global technology companies in AI across the world. I think this is just going to come on leaps and bounds really quickly, and so hopefully that risk will start to be minimized.
So you got thoughts on obviously risks in AI filling gaps?
Yeah, so I think the amplification thing is really interesting, because you're right, the impact that one person making a biased decision or just getting something wrong is going to be much smaller in terms of reach compared to the AI. But then I guess we are at that point where that amplification could tip the balance in favour of AI, because when we see it on a bigger scale and it becomes more obvious because we're monitoring it better, and it's maybe easier to monitor it and evaluate it, and it happens to more people, so we see it because it's visible, do we then start to be able to solve that problem more quickly than we've been able to solve it with humans? Because I think, your points about being able to infer tone and and like kind of speech and all of those kind of things, but I think if you have experienced recruiters, then definitely you would say they're going to be able to do that much better than a machine currently. But what about the sort of inexperienced recruiters, the people who don't do it very often? And I think back, and you may remember from the RAF days, but talking to the selecting officers then, who still thought that if you did that, you were defensive. If you didn't make eye contact all of the time, then you couldn't possibly be an officer because you weren't able to make eye contact. Didn't understand that actually that's just comfortable for some people, and that for some people eye contact isn't natural, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're shifty or they're not capable of doing the job. And our understanding as humans is moving on, and we've made mistakes in the past or interpreted things wrongly, and so yes, AI is going to do that as well, but do we identify it quicker and therefore be able to deal with it quicker? I don't know, but it's a potential benefit.
That's a really interesting one, because obviously you've got to think about generations of today, right? So if you go back like 25, 30 years ago, no mobile phones, I think, and people weren't heads in hands, scrolling through your TikToks, your Snapchats, your Instagrams. And if you think about the youth of today, that everything's done quick now, and they're less people orientated than they were, and I think that's a fair assessment. But if the AI is being built to do those assessments, it's probably being built off of data sets of individuals that have been through the process, not thinking about what the future workforce does as well. So I was just taking that example of, especially from a neurodiverse perspective, how things have evolved over the last, especially 10, 15 years. It's really important to say, how is that AI trained and what data sets it's used off as well, which makes it really, really interesting. I think what I also quite like is obviously the hallucination and fabrication part that we need to be concerned about, and monitoring it. Do you think though, if do you think AI, if you are using AI, I mean, and it does make a mistake, it's going to get picked up quicker? Because obviously it's making more mistakes quicker. So they're getting raised earlier?
I guess it would depend. I think from maybe a candidate perspective, using it, and Felicity's example of, you know, embellishing their, you know, written statements or CVs or whatever and putting in things that aren't true, that isn't necessarily going to get picked up as quickly, depending on how extreme the hallucination is. But from a wider perspective, you know, if you've introduced some sort of bias into the system, you know, like the Amazon and the mails, you know, that does get picked up more quickly because you're reviewing your processes and you have a large sample of data, and you're going to see that much more quickly than perhaps you would have done if it had just been a whole bank of different recruiters doing different things in different places and having different types of biases, etc., because it wouldn't have been one kind of combined data set.
Yeah, I think you raised a point there, Lucy, and there's a really big thing, I think, here about evaluation and checking in and monitoring, because you know, we've both worked in the public sector for such a long time, and the scrutiny on fairness, I think, is much larger than in the private sector. So, you know, for example, all recruitment campaigns have to be fair. You know, they will be evaluated afterwards for adverse impact, and you know, to check the various levels of disproportionality against protected characteristic groups. So maybe then in where you have that monitoring in place, and again, all this can be automated, right? So it can be done really easily. But if there is an issue with the AI and you're monitoring it very closely, and you suddenly see, oh, hold on a minute, lots of women have been filtered out of the process. Why has that happened? Or you know, lots of people of a particular race or different age groups. You know, if you're monitoring it, that's brilliant. But I think one of the issues is because where you're sifting out, you know, we know in OP, if you sift out about 30% of people, generally you can get a process to be quite fair. But I can kind of see, you know, using AI and suddenly you're sifting out huge percentages of candidates in one go, potentially not checking what's going on, and suddenly actually you are having a really unfair process where groups are being disadvantaged, and then it's not being investigated as to why. I think if those investigations and evaluations are in place, comes back to your point where you can probably then start to fix those really easily, because you're fixing one thing, which is the algorithm, rather than 100 assessors, you know, who have all got, yes, very trained and sort of standardized ways of doing things, but will inevitably have slight nuances in how they assess.
I mean, wrap up that segment, I would say you both are skeptical that AI can genuinely assess soft skills, right? And that's okay. You know, yeah, and that's all right, and that's where, you know, the majority of the market feel that they probably are at the moment, right? But which leads us nicely into our next poll question that was out. I can see 50% of the people that have responded. The top question is, which sort of in line, what unique strengths do humans bring to recruitment that AI cannot replace? Which I think is a little bit of a segment away into the last question. But have I got any takers to go first? What do you think humans can bring that AI definitely can't replace? Well, I would say first of all, soft skills, right? So
yeah.
I think it's probably about. Oh, go on, you guys.
No, I was just going to say, I think that is an ever-evolving question as well, isn't it? Because I think that there are currently things like we've just talked about in terms of being able to analyse those soft skills, being better at analysing, you know, body language, tone, kind of that, all of those kind of aspects, being able to probe, you know, go into more detail. So the difference between like a pre-recorded, automated, scored interview versus a, you know, more conversational interview where you can get more out of a candidate and understand them better and understand their fit for the role better, etc. But I can imagine that it won't be long before you can build AI that can do that pretty effectively. Again, you know, it's all about that monitoring, the evaluation, making sure it is working correctly. But I think we will get to that point where it will be able to have that. I think you can already see it. There are examples of it. I don't think people are utilising it widely at the moment, but that more conversational AI and that more probing aspects of AI. So I do think that there is this kind of trend towards those bits that we think are unique to us actually will be able to be done by AI.
Yeah, and I think there's something about a human's understanding of context as well, which is different, and maybe that isn't going to be picked up by AI yet. The empathy that a human can have. I mean, I think you could put into AI, "I'm feeling sad," and it could say, "I'm really sorry to hear that," but it doesn't feel sorry. That's not real empathy. Whereas a human, could give you that. I think our adaptability as well in different situations and circumstances, as you said, Lucy, and responding to a candidate and how they're feeling and coming across at a particular time. I'm just thinking about sometimes with different processing speeds, when you're interviewing a candidate, and sometimes you just need to pause, right, and let someone have 30 seconds to think before they respond, rather than just throwing question after question at them. And how do you build that into, say, if you were going to have an AI interviewer, right? So, it could still be a look real, it can be an avatar, it can come out with really good probing questions because it's basing everything on the success profile that's built in and what the candidate's saying. But how do you start to build in the understanding, of that candidate? Are they nervous? Is it a cultural difference? Is it this? Is it that? I think that's something that is still a very human perspective that we have. And I wonder, again, I think something I was saying earlier around that sort of ethical accountability, we can justify and explain our decisions. I don't know yet how well AI can do that. And I'm thinking about, building feedback into processes. The majority of, I guess, more automated testing, but we've spent years now building in feedback so that even though it's a 20-minute, 30-minute test that you're just doing online, and then you will get an instant response, you will get some feedback based on how you've responded. And that's great for candidates because it helps them to feel like they've spent some time and it's worthwhile time, and to be able to think about the future or whether this role is right or wrong for them. And I'm not sure yet how much in testing, particularly AI-led testing, that feedback is there. And I think that's a really important part for a candidate, to really understand and develop as part of a recruitment process as well.
From my perspective, when I think about it, and I think there's something that could be lost around explaining the job role, right? So can AI explain the job role, explain the culture? It's sort of like that EVP strategy. So, I know you go through a recruitment process, and you can read web pages and you can engage with chatbots and ask particular questions, but sometimes there's a lot of things you want to know from people about the job role, the culture, the environment, the ways of working, that sometimes that builds into that whole decision making for candidates to go and work in places that potentially AI can't give. And I think sometimes that we think about a recruitment process sometimes just in an assessment, assessing soft skills, but we've got to remember what candidates are going to ask as well. So it's not just what the client wants, it's what does the candidate want to. And I don't know whether AI is always the right answer for candidates to be asking, chatbots and responses. Sometimes they do want to get on conversations and they do want to talk to individuals around, really what's it like working here? What's the positives? And tell me what the negatives are, right? Because then I become a better, more informed, qualified candidate when I take that job. Now, I just think that culture environment piece is quite an interesting one as well.
And is that changing as well? You talked about future proofing everything. I look at my kids and they would much rather chat to a chatbot than pick up the phone and talk to somebody, and potentially feel like they might get weirdly and might get a more honest answer, because if you're applying for a job, essentially that recruiter or hiring manager is on a bit of a sales pitch, and they're only going to let you talk to people in the organization probably who they know are going to say good things about working there. They're going to try and manage that impression, whereas potentially an AI that can scour all of the forums for any like negative and positive comments that have been made about this company, find people who've left, kind of expose a much wider reach of information. But it all comes back to that trust, doesn't it? That like if we still trust the humans more, we are going to want more of that in the process. So to talk to them about the job, to be interviewed by them, to have that personal contact. But as the trust in that AI to do those things better or more effectively, maybe that requirement for that human touch will feel less prevalent, and with the change in the kind of generation and what they want in terms of personal contact.
Yeah, and maybe it changes where our high touch points with candidates are. That I think the whole thing with AI is that it enables us to handle volumes and processes really quickly. So I know we're talking very much about assessment today, but actually, the way that we're using AI across the whole end-to-end recruitment process is different now. And the processes that sit behind that, whether it's candidate vetting or our kind of candidate call centers, and that's changing, and that's helping us to process differently. So actually that allows us as humans to do more of that value add stuff, more of the engagement, because earlier I was talking about the evaluation of processes, but the bit on top of that is we still need to know whether these people are staying in the organizations. If we put loads of AI into a process and humans really removed from it, actually what's the retention like of that process? Because otherwise it becomes a very expensive way of recruiting somebody that then leaves. So there's still that bit I think we really need to focus on around retention and performance in role, depending on the process that we've used, to make sure that actually we're really investing in a process that works and gives us the staff who actually stay, as well as being right for the role.
Which is, I guess, is what we do already, or should be doing already, or before AI. And that's, I guess, where we as Oxites can add that value, because that's our sort of bread and butter, isn't it? Is doing that evaluation, doing those validation studies, looking at how well everything's working, the adverse impact, like you mentioned. And that process should be the same whatever methods we're using, and whatever hybrid or individual AI versus human, looking at how it all works and being able to then feed that back into systems, but also maybe feed that back into candidates. We talk about explaining to candidates how it's being used, being able to say how it's made that decision, and part of being able to do all of that analysis is if actually you can present that information back in a kind of candidate friendly way to say, this is how AI is being used, this is how it's making its decisions, and actually we've looked at X, Y, and Z, and it has these outcomes that we can see are actually better than the outcomes we were getting before. So you are going to get a better experience, and if you are successful, you are going to be a better fit for that organisation. Are you now happier with the idea of AI being used in your process?
Yes, that transparency, isn't it? And I think it just made me think about when we brought kind of game-based assessments into a client 6-7 years ago, and it was so new then. And there were a load of questions around, well, hold on a second, you're assessing me using what? And this isn't related to the role. So actually there was a huge amount of work that went into the communication strategy around actually what does this assessment do? How does it assess you? Why are we using it? Why is it valid? So yeah, maybe that actually really hasn't changed. It's just doing it with a new process.
Yes.
Perhaps the last poll question, and to be honest with you, they're all quite equal around candidate fears versus client cost saving dreams. Now, from my perspective, just as we go into this, I mean, you can people aren't calling out naming and shaming organizations at the moment with the auto responses and the rejections, but they are highlighting to LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed company pages at the moment that they are being rejected within 15 minutes after spending half an hour on their cover sheets and their application forms, right? So it's a real emotional issue at the moment that obviously there's lots of battles going on, but I think we just had a little bit of movement in the polls. I'll give it another 30 seconds if people want to go into the polls and just have a quick look over the questions to double check. But you know, from my perspective, it's a balance, right? It's really finding out and weighing up your options. I think listening to both of you this afternoon, sorry, it's after lunch, and looking at the benefits of it, there's a real risk that if you implement AI, but you implement it wrong, it could be quite detrimental to your organization and business. But you know, we do have to think there are uses of AI, you know, and we use them at particular points in our recruitment processes that we deliver, and there's positives to it. So I think it's just finding that fine balance of where you implement it, how you implement it, how you monitor it is the real important factors. Make sure that you've got a real business case. But the question that is winning though, and hands up first of who wants to answer, but how can organizations balance speed, cost, and candidate trust in AI-enabled hiring? And it's a big question that's going across the whole market at the moment, to be fair. So who wants to give their first thoughts?
I'll come in. I think for organisations, this is a must. So there's no choice now, I think, about not using AI and building that into your processes. From a competitive marketplace, you know, we have to balance the fact that all of the other organisations are going to start doing things using AI. You know, as I mentioned, it's not just the assessments, it's how we're processing candidates from the application stage right through to onboarding. So if we're not modernising and utilising AI, which will do things quicker and in a more automated fashion, we will fall behind, we will be more expensive than our competitors. So there is a real need on organisations to push forward with that modernisation. On the other side of that, though, it's about recognising where it adds value and where it won't. And again, you know, it comes back to all the things we've probably been speaking about, making sure you're using it in places where it's not going to potentially impact candidate trust, or you do a lot of work to ensure that the candidates understand, you build in that transparency, the options which will need to be in place to say, actually, I do want a human to look at this as well. So I think, you know, that there's going to be a lot on sort of return on investment, you know, and business cases around where this will work, where it won't. But and again, maybe it comes back to what I was picking up on before around it doesn't just end with, oh, and we've onboarded them and we got paid. It's, and then did the candidate stay? You know, did they join the organisation? Did they stay? Because that to our clients, or if you're just the hiring organisation with your own kind of HR teams, that also adds part of your kind of your overall costings. So I think it's probably quite a large spreadsheet covering a huge amount of processes, you know, to see from a real kind of cost basis where it's valuable and where it's not.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, you know, it is where everyone's going to have to go. I think a lot of the conversations are often around speed and that time to hire and reducing that. And I think, and we've mentioned quite a few times, I think, over the last half an hour or so, about actually it will be different for different use cases. So whether you're looking at it through candidate lenses versus recruiter lenses, but also for different roles and volume, non-volume, etc. And I think, you know, there is almost like a kind of a drop-off point where speed becomes too speedy. So, you know, actually you might think actually rejecting somebody within 15 minutes of them applying is good, because they're getting an instant response. They know straight away that they're not right for that role and they can get on with their day, rather than that, you know, constantly checking, have I had an email to say what's happening next, have I got through, etc. But actually that speed has not been a positive candidate experience, because they don't feel seen, they don't feel like it's been properly reviewed, because it can't possibly have been properly reviewed in 15 minutes. And so it is really thinking about kind of what you're actually trying to achieve, and the unintended consequences of it. Because I think, like I say, I think people felt like speed would be a good thing for everybody, because it would improve experience for candidates, but also good for the organisation. But actually, it's had the opposite effect in many cases. So yeah, I think it's looking at the whole piece across different roles, different levels, volumes, etc., and working out what fits that particular requirement, rather than necessarily a one size fits all for that balance between those three things.
Quite a rigorous process to go through though as well, and you need to be comprehensive, and it's one of the reasons that obviously we have both of you in the business, and when we're working with clients to help us navigate that, right? You have to look at the cost efficiencies, you have to weigh up the benefits of it. So from my perspective, it's very useful. I'm just trying to open up some QA functions, but it's I think I'm having some technical difficulties with my accessible thing, the Q questions
I
and
can see it if you
answers.
want me.
Yeah.
I can see you've got a question.
Apologies. I'm gonna have to rely on YouTube. My Q&A is not up.
That's fine. So we've got a question from Becky. Do you think that we may be able to improve recruitment experience and outcomes in the future by using anti-bias in AI?
Good question.
I suppose it depends. I'm not 100% sure what you mean by anti-bias, Becky, but I guess that if you mean almost building it out, so you build a process, you run some candidates through it or whatever, and you can see actually there's an issue here. I think that's the bit that becomes much more easy now, to then change that, because you can start to identify within the algorithm what's causing that bias. I think there's going to be a really interesting, probably, conversation around performance differences sometimes between groups, and whether they're natural or not. And so, how do you build things out? Because there's always this balance, right? You've got to get the right person in the role, but equally you've got to have a fair process, and so there is always that sort of validity balance. But I think just because of the sheer volume of data that you'll be able to get when using AI in those kind of assessment processes, I think you'll have much more ability to build out the bias in processes.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that essentially AI is probably just magnifying problems that we've had a lot over the past, in terms of being able to magnify those biases and magnify the kind of problems and things that humans do wrong, as well as AI. But because it's magnifying them, we'll have, like you say, all of that additional data that we'll be able to look at more regularly in real time to improve processes whilst they're happening. So you can be running that in the background, and actually, if you can see before you've even said to somebody whether they've got through that first round of assessments that actually there's an issue, you can try and deal with that before you actually make the mistake and invite the wrong people or reject the wrong people. So I think it's definitely going to improve things massively over the coming years, for sure.
My Q&A function is now up and running.
Okay.
My favourite intro probably I've ever seen to an AI question. So, greeting Cranwellians. This would be
This is our fellow OG Carl Barnes, who we used to both work with at RAF Cranwell.
good news. What would be your key advice to internal recruitment teams and HR teams in terms of starting to explore AI in recruitment and selection? Good question. Where do you start?
Do you know where I started? Having a conversation with ChatGPT, because I thought, you know what, I don't know enough about AI. I don't really know what it is and what it means and what it can do. So I asked it, and we ended up just having this really long conversation around different models. Centaur versus Cyborg is a great place to start. Just really understanding what it is. I think things can feel really scary, especially new technology. And I think it's about making sure that you can learn about it in really just ways that make sense, so I guess, and I think probably, Carl, you'll have seen this anyway, but a lot of organizations now have AI training programs for their staff to start introducing, but it's probably something, that we want to do some more in HR specifically, and recruitment, about how do you use it, how do you use it fairly, process guidelines. The problem is it's ever changing. But yeah, I think probably just starting very slowly with just gentle introductions as to what it is and what it can do.
Yeah, I think start small, but also kind of reverse engineer it. Like, what is it in your process that you're trying to improve or fix? Is it because you suddenly have huge amounts of applications? Is it because you think that you're getting lots of ChatGPT written CVs or application questions? Is it that you don't think feedback's being given very well or comprehensively, or to enough, you're not able to give it to enough candidates? Where in your process do you think it would add value? And then just starting with one of those, so starting small and looking at what could be out there, like what you could implement in terms of automation and AI that would help that one small part of the process, and build it out from there.
And I think just a final add on that, Carl, is ask questions of suppliers. I think we're seeing all over the HR world these suppliers now that can do this and do that, and they can solve the world using AI. But if you actually then ask, you need to dig down into what's underpinning that. How are they using it? What's as we always do with new test providers, what research and validation sits behind that? Because I think otherwise we're going to fall foul of a lot of companies bringing in processes that actually don't have that robustness behind them. That's probably the biggest fear at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of tech startup companies that have seen a gap or potential gap in the market, and you talk to them and they don't have any psychologists or data scientists, behavioral scientists. They don't have that. They're just technology implementing AI into it, what they think is an easy to fix problem, without that wider understanding.
I think that's the important bit for me. I think for those that are starting out, yes, speak to ChatGPT. Yes, speak to Copilot, who's got like the ideas thing, the ideas agent that you can do. But come and have a conversation with us. We're pretty open. We've been through this process for the last 2 years of down selecting providers and systems and technologies and doing research. So, more than welcome to have a conversation. We can direct you in the right path. It's one of the reasons that we're opening up the webinar, because we know lots of people just need to start somewhere. Which brings a really good question around, there's people working around different paces. It's going to be interesting to see the public-private sector turn off at the moment, and the point, because there's one that's governed by lots of policies and procedures where the private sector doesn't have as many, and those tools and technologies that are underpinning each. It's going to the next 12 to 18 months is going to be a really interesting market for the recruitment market. I think we've got time for one final question, which I can see Ali's asked. She's asked, would you therefore recommend a blended solution approach, AI with a human wraparound, being the best way to ensure a positive candidate experience and in turn drive improved staff retention?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think hybrid all the way at the moment, Ali, and really making sure that positive experience is coming into the picture, and it's not all about cost savings and efficiencies.
Yeah, and using the humans where they can add the most value, and using the AI in those places where it's not as necessary to have that human in the loop. I think it will change. I do think it's going to change, and it's going to go more in favour of AI, but at the moment I definitely think it needs to be a blended approach.
I was just trying to get up my last slide, but I've realised we've obviously got 2 minutes to go. So, I think what we're going to do is, if there's any more particular questions that go in the chat in the next minute or 2 minutes, what we will try and do is answer those questions and send out some responses. But I believe we're doing this as a recording. We're going to publish it online. So there will be some content and materials that we will follow up with. But please reach out to us if you want to continue this conversation further. And I want to thank Lucy and Felicity very much for the insightful conversation and debate. What's quite nice is, I don't think the market is, there's no one size that fits all, right? I think my key takeaways that I was jotting down was augment, don't replace. I think my other headline was role type matters from listening to both of you, especially in those volume opportunities rather than sort of like the executive search. I think the third one was address those candidate fears, monitor the risk, the bias that's in it, weigh up that speed versus fairness, and then that transparency that builds trust is sort of my 6 key takeaways I think I've taken away from this. So I think those are really important. We'll try and put those in a bit of a slide and send it out. But I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's joined, and then obviously thank you for Lucy and Felicity for joining in and sharing their expertise. And what we will do is we will now close the call and just thank you very much for attending.